A black boy from a rental apartment complex claiming his father commands entire military divisions? That's the most absurd fabrication I've encountered in 23 years of teaching. Mrs. Shirley Newberry doesn't whisper it. She announces it to the entire 4th grade class at Riverside Elementary. Then she snatches Brian Jordan's carefully written assignment off his desk and rips it in half. The tearing sound cuts through the silence. She reads it again and again. The pieces flutter like confetti onto Brian's scuffed sneakers. You don't get to invent fantasies about being important, Brian. 4-star generals live in mansions with gates. Their children attend elite academies. They arrive in chauffeur-driven vehicles. Her voice drops to ice. They certainly don't show up dressed like, well, like you. 10-year-old Brian sits frozen at his desk. His jaw clenches. Every student in the room gawks at him. Some cover their mouths, fighting giggles. Others point, emboldened by their teacher's cruelty. Mrs. Newberry crumples the torn pieces into a ball and drops them into the trash bin beside her desk. Pathetic. Have you ever watched a teacher humiliate a child for being black and telling the truth? 2 hours earlier, Brian Jordan woke to his father's voice echoing from the kitchen. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, soldier. Let's move." The Jordan family occupied a modest 3-bedroom apartment in a working-class complex near Fort Bragg. Close enough to base that you could hear the distant rumble of training exercises on quiet mornings. The furniture was functional, but aging. The walls displayed family photographs, but nothing that screamed military prestige. No dress uniforms hanging in view, no medals mounted in shadow boxes, no ceremonial flags or commendation plaques. Security protocol. General Richard Jordan never advertised what he did for a living. In the kitchen, Brian found his dad standing at the counter in jeans and a faded Duke sweatshirt, scrambling eggs. To any neighbor passing by the window, he looked ordinary. A mechanic, maybe, a high school coach, perhaps a postal worker. His mother, Dr. Ellen Jordan, rushed past in navy scrubs, travel mug already in hand. She had back-to-back surgeries scheduled at the VA Medical Center. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like a tank, hung a child's crayon drawing, a stick figure in uniform with 4 bright stars on each shoulder. Beside it, a wall calendar with today's date circled in red marker. Career day, Friday, 10 a.m. Brian couldn't stop the nervous energy buzzing through his chest. He'd been anticipating this day for weeks, maybe months. "Dad, can I show them the picture of you with the Secretary of Defense?" General Jordan glanced toward his wife as she grabbed her keys. Dr. Ellen Jordan gave him that look, the one that said their son deserved to feel proud, not hidden. "Brian, remember what we discussed about operational security?" "I know, son." Richard's voice carried warmth but firmness. "Our family maintains discretion. We keep a low profile for safety reasons. You understand why, right?" Brian nodded slowly, but he didn't really understand, not completely. Other kids got to brag about their parents. Why couldn't he? Brian tucked a photo of his father in full dress uniform deep into his backpack. The medals, the ribbons, the 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. He'd promised to keep things vague. But today, just once, he wanted his classmates to see the truth. What Brian didn't know was that Mrs. Shirley Newberry had already decided, before he even opened his mouth, that a boy like him couldn't possibly have a father like that. And she was about to make him pay for proving her wrong. Before we dive into what happened next, do me one favor. If you already know this teacher is about to regret every word she just said, smash that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story about justice, truth, and people getting exactly what they deserve. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you Team Brian? Let's see how far this story reaches across the globe. Now, let's continue with the story. Brian stood in front of his bedroom mirror, holding the photograph with both hands. The edges were slightly worn from how many times he'd pulled it out of the drawer to look at it. His father stood ramrod straight in full dress uniform, the 4 silver stars on each shoulder catching the camera flash like tiny suns. Behind him, the American flag hung in perfect symmetry. Medals formed neat rows across his chest, each one representing something Brian barely understood but felt proud of anyway. He'd written his assignment 3 times. The first draft had too much detail. The second felt like bragging. The third version, the one folded carefully in his backpack, walked the line his father had drawn. My dad serves in the United States Army. He's a 4-star general. He works hard to keep our country safe. Simple, true, vague enough to honor the rules. Brian tucked the photograph between the pages of his math textbook and zipped the bag shut. His hands trembled slightly. His father's words from breakfast echoed in his head. We keep a low profile for safety reasons. But every other kid in Mrs. Newberry's class had brought something. Emma Chen's mother owned 3 restaurants and had sent in gourmet cookies for everyone. Marcus Williams's father was a sports agent, and Marcus wore a signed basketball jersey to school. Even quiet Sophie Martinez had printed out newspaper articles about her mom's work as a civil rights attorney. Brian had nothing but words on lined paper. He walked to the kitchen, where his father was rinsing breakfast plates. The Duke sweatshirt made him look like any other dad. No one driving past their apartment complex would see General Richard Jordan. They'd see Rick Jordan, the guy who mowed the shared lawn on Saturday and nodded politely to neighbors. Dad? Brian's voice came out smaller than intended. What if they don't believe me? Richard turned off the faucet and dried his hands. He crouched down to Brian's eye level, the same way he had when Brian was 5 and scared of thunderstorms. Son, the truth doesn't need people to believe it for it to be real. You understand? Brian nodded, but the knot in his stomach pulled tighter. His father stood and rested a hand on Brian's shoulder. You've got this, soldier. Just read what you wrote. Simple and honest. That's all you need to do. Brian wanted to ask if he could bring the photo. Just hold it up for 10 seconds. Let them see. But the look in his father's eyes, equal parts pride and caution, stopped him. Outside, the school bus rumbled to a stop at the corner. Brian grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. Brian. He turned back. His father stood in the doorway, still in that sweatshirt and jeans, looking nothing like the man in the photograph hidden in Brian's bag. Make me proud. Brian forced a smile. Always. The bus door hissed open. Brian climbed the steps, found an empty seat near the back, and pressed his forehead against the cool window. His backpack sat heavy in his lap. Inside it, folded between textbook pages, was proof that his father was exactly who Brian said he was. He just hoped he wouldn't need it. 4 stops later, Riverside Elementary came into view. Brian's stomach flipped. In 2 hours, Mrs. Newberry would call his name, and everything would change. Mrs. Shirley Newberry stood in the classroom doorway like a queen greeting dignitaries. Her blonde hair was sprayed into submission, her blazer pressed within an inch of its life. She wore the smile she reserved for important occasions, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Oh, Mr. Caldwell, we're so honored you could take time from your busy schedule. The children are absolutely thrilled. Brian watched from his desk near the back as Mrs. Newberry practically curtsied before Tyler Caldwell's father. Jonathan Caldwell wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of the Jordan family's rent. His watch caught the fluorescent lights, scattering tiny rainbows across the whiteboard. Tyler stood beside him, chest puffed out, grinning at the attention. Mr. Caldwell owns half the real estate developments in this county, Mrs. Newberry announced to the class, her voice dripping with admiration. Some of you probably live in buildings his company built. Tyler's smirk widened. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of casual ownership, like showing off a prize-winning show dog. Brian looked down at his worn notebook. The corner was dog-eared. A coffee stain bloomed across the bottom, from when his mother had accidentally set her mug on his homework 2 weeks ago. He traced the stain with his finger. Mrs. Newberry ushered Mr. Caldwell to the front of the classroom like he was visiting royalty. She'd set up a special chair, her chair, for parent presenters. Tyler's father settled into it, unbuttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Brian's entrance that morning had been different. He'd walked through the door at 8:47, 3 minutes before the bell. Mrs. Newberry had been erasing the board, her back to the students filtering in. "You're late, Jordan." Brian had checked the clock. 8:47. The bell rang at 8:50. "Almost late, ma'am." She'd turned then, her eyes scanning him from head to toe, taking inventory. His sneakers, clean but creased from years of wear. His jeans, no holes but faded at the knees. His t-shirt, tucked in like his father taught him, and it's slightly too small, the sleeves stopping just short of where they should. She'd returned to the board without another word, but Brian had felt the judgment radiating off her like heat from asphalt in summer. Now, Mr. Caldwell was talking about profit margins and investment portfolios. Half the class looked confused. The other half looked bored, that Mrs. Newberry hung on every word, nodding enthusiastically, occasionally interjecting with sounds of amazement. Fascinating. Just fascinating. When Mr. Caldwell finished, Mrs. Newberry led the applause. She thanked him 3 times. She assured Tyler his father was an inspiration to them all. She walked them both to the door, her hand hovering near Mr. Caldwell's elbow, like a butler attending to a lord. The door closed. Mrs. Newberry turned back to the class. Her smile evaporated. "All right, let's keep this moving." She picked up her clipboard and scanned the list. Her fingers stopped. She looked up, her eyes landing on Brian like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Brian Jordan." Her voice was flat, clinical. "You're next." Brian's heart hammered against his ribs. Around him, students shifted in their seats. Emma Chen glanced over with something like sympathy. Marcus Williams avoided eye contact entirely. Brian stood, his legs feeling disconnected from his body. He walked to the front of the classroom, his assignment clutched in his hand. The paper trembled slightly. Mrs. Newberry leaned against her desk, arms crossed. She didn't offer him the chair. She didn't smile. She just stared at him with an expression that said she already knew everything she needed to know about Brian Jordan and his family. "Go ahead." Her tone suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's hear it." Brian unfolded his paper. His mouth went dry. The words blurred for a second before sharpening back into focus. He began to read. "My name is Brian Jordan. My dad serves in the United States Army. He's a 4-star general." "Stop." The word cracked through the classroom like a gunshot. Brian's voice died in his throat. Mrs. Newberry pushed off from her desk, her face already flushing red. "What did you just say?" Brian's fingers gripped the paper tighter. "I said my dad is a 4-star. Stop lying about your father." The classroom went silent. 23 students froze. Even the clock up on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Mrs. Newberry moved toward him, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown. "We do not tolerate fairy tales in this classroom, especially from students who clearly need a reality check. But it's true." "It's true?" Her voice climbed an octave. She stopped 2 feet from his desk, looming over him. "You expect me to believe that you," she gestured at him, her hand sweeping from his worn sneakers to his too small shirt, "live in that apartment complex on Riverside Drive, ride the public school bus, and your father is a 4-star general?" Someone in the back giggled, then someone else. The sound spread like wildfire. Mrs. Newberry's finger shot out, pointing directly at Brian's face. "Do you know what 4-star generals do, Brian? Do you have any idea the level of responsibility that rank carries?" "Yes, ma'am. They command hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They advise the President of the United States. They live in official residences with security details." Her voice dripped with contempt. "They certainly don't raise their children in rental apartments." More laughter now. Louder. Emma Chen covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook. Marcus Williams pointed at Brian, emboldened by the teacher's rage. Tyler Caldwell practically fell out of his chair laughing.
My dad doesn't lie about his job, Tyler shouted. Maybe Brian's dad is like a janitor on a military base.
The class exploded. Students pointed at Brian from every direction, their fingers like accusations. Their laughter crashed over him in waves. Mrs. Newberry snatched the paper from Brian's hands. She held it up for the class to see, her face twisted in disgust. This is what happens when you confuse fantasy with reality. She ripped the paper in half. The sound cut through the laughter. For a second, the room went quiet. Brian watched the two pieces flutter in her hands. Then she ripped it again, and again, and again. The pieces fell like snow onto Brian's sneakers. Scraps of his carefully chosen words scattered across the floor. United States Army, torn. 4-star general, shredded. Keep our country safe, destroyed. You don't get to make up stories to feel special, Brian. Mrs. Newberry crumpled the torn pieces into a ball and dropped them into the trash can beside her desk. Generals live in mansions. Their children go to elite private schools. They drive in motorcades. Her voice dropped to a cold whisper, but every student heard it. They certainly don't show up looking like you. Brian's hands shook in his lap. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Around him, classmates pointed and laughed. Some made general salutes in mockery. Others whispered to each other, their eyes cutting toward him. Pathetic. Mrs. Newberry straightened her blazer and returned to her desk. Principal's office. Now. We'll call your parents and get to the bottom of whatever fantasy world you're living in. Brian stood on trembling legs. His backpack hung heavy on his shoulder. The photograph still hidden inside, pressed between textbook pages. Proof she refused to see. He walked toward the door. Behind him, the laughter continued. Mrs. Newberry's voice followed him into the hallway. And Brian, you'll be apologizing to this class for wasting our time. The door closed. The hallway stretched empty before him. Brian's vision blurred. But he kept walking. Principal Harold Kensington sat behind a desk cluttered with budget reports and district memos. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he listened to Mrs. Newberry's breathless account of Brian's alleged disruption. He told the entire class his father is a 4-star general. She dabbed at her forehead with a tissue. I couldn't let him mock the assignment like that. These children need to learn the difference between reality and fantasy. Brian sat in the hard plastic chair across from the desk, his backpack clutched in his lap. He hadn't said a word since leaving the classroom. A photograph pressed against his spine through the thin fabric of the bag. So close, but he couldn't reach for it. Not yet. His father's voice echoed in his head. Security protocol. Principal Kensington removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Brian, these are serious accusations. Lying about a parent's occupation isn't just dishonest. It's disrespectful to the family who actually have loved ones serving in our military. I'm not lying, sir. The principal's eyes narrowed. Son, I've been running the school for 14 years. I know every family in this district. If we had a 4-star general's child enrolled here, I would know about it. Mrs. Newberry crossed her arms. Exactly. Generals don't hide, Harold. They're public figures. There would be records, documentation, security clearances filed with the school. My dad keeps a low profile, Brian said quietly, for security reasons. Security reasons. Principal Kensington's tone suggested he'd heard every excuse imaginable. He turned to his computer and began typing. What's your father's full name? Richard Vincent Jordan. The keyboard clicked. The principal scrolled. His expression remained neutral, but Brian saw the moment the search came up empty. Mrs. Newberry leaned over to peer at the screen, her lips pursing in vindication. Nothing in the district database. Principal Kensington swiveled back toward Brian. No military affiliation listed on your enrollment forms. Emergency contact shows your mother as a surgical nurse at the VA Medical Center, and your father as... He squinted at the screen. Employed
government sector. That's it.
Because he can't advertise what he does. Brian, the principal's voice sharpened. I'm trying to help you here, but you need to tell us the truth. What does your father actually do? He's a 4-star general in the United States Army.
Mrs. Newberry threw up her hands. This is exactly what I'm talking about. He's doubling down on the lie instead of taking responsibility. Principal Kensington picked up his desk phone. Let's settle this right now. He dialed. What's your home number, Brian? Brian recited it from memory. The phone rang and rang and rang. No answer. The principal hung up and tried again. Same result. He set the phone down and made a note on a pad. We'll need to speak with your parents before we decide on appropriate consequences. My mom's in surgery, Brian said. She works at the hospital. She can't answer her phone during procedures. And your father? He's working. Mrs. Newberry scoffed. Conveniently unreachable. Principal Kensington leaned back in his chair, a leather creaking under his weight. Here's what's going to happen, Brian. You're going to return to class and apologize to Mrs. Newberry and your classmates for disrupting career day with false information. You'll complete a written reflection on the importance of honesty. And we'll be contacting your parents this afternoon for a mandatory conference. But I didn't lie. The alternative is a 3-day suspension for insubordination and creating a hostile learning environment. The principal's eyes locked onto Brian's. Your choice. The room pressed in from all sides. The walls seemed closer than they'd been 5 minutes ago. Brian's throat tightened. His eyes burned, but he refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not in front of them. Mrs. Newberry stood, smoothing her blazer. I'll walk him back to class. Brian rose on them steady legs. The backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Inside it, hidden between textbook pages, was everything he needed to prove the truth. But his father's voice wouldn't stop echoing. Security protocol. A low profile. You understand? Brian followed Mrs. Newberry into the hallway. Behind them, Principal Kensington was already picking up the phone to try the Jordan house again. Still no answer.
The hallway stretched forever. Each step echoed. Mrs. Newberry walked 3 paces ahead of Brian, her posture rigid with self-righteousness. They passed the library, the art room, the trophy case displaying faded photographs of championship teams from decades ago. Brian's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. His hands were numb. The backpack straps dug into his shoulders. Mrs. Newberry stopped at the classroom door. She turned to face him, her expression mixing pity with contempt. This is your opportunity to make things right, Brian. Honesty and accountability, that's what we're teaching here. She opened the door. 23 faces turned toward them. The laughter had faded to whispers, but the mockery lingered in their eyes. Tyler Caldwell smirked from his seat near the front. Emma Chen looked away quickly. Marcus Williams studied his desk like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mrs. Newberry placed a hand on Brian's shoulder, not comforting, but steering. She guided him to the front of the classroom like a prisoner being led to sentencing. Class, Brian has something he'd like to say. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone adults use when they're about to humiliate a child for their own good. Let's give him our full attention. The whispers stopped. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Brian stood facing his classmates. His legs trembled. He could feel every eye on him, cataloging his worn clothes, his cheap sneakers, his too small shirt, judging, confirming what Mrs. Newberry had already told them, that boys like Brian didn't have fathers like the one he described. Go ahead, Brian. Mrs. Newberry folded her arms and leaned against her desk. We're waiting. Brian's mouth opened. No sound came out. His throat had turned to sandpaper. Tyler raised his hand. Mrs. Newberry nodded at him. Is he going to tell us what his dad really does? Tyler's voice dripping with fake curiosity. Like, is he a janitor or does he work at McDonald's? Scattered gibbles erupted. Mrs. Newberry held up a hand for quiet.
but her lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "That's enough, Tyler." She turned back to Brian. "Whenever you're ready." Brian forced the words out. "I'm sorry." "Louder, please. The whole class needs to hear." "I'm sorry for lying about my dad's job." The words tasted like poison. "For making up stories and wasting everyone's time." "And?" Mrs. Newberry prompted. Brian's vision blurred. The faces in front of him swam together into a mass of judgment and ridicule. "And for being disrespectful to the assignment." "Thank you, Brian." Mrs. Newberry's voice softened, satisfied. "That took courage. Now we can move forward." She gestured toward his desk at the back. Brian turned to walk, but Tyler's stage whisper carried across the room. "My dad says people who lie about the military are the worst kind of fake patriots." More snickers. Brian kept walking. Each step felt like moving through quicksand. He reached his desk and slid into the chair. His backpack thudded to the floor beside him. Inside it, pressed between math textbook pages, the photograph waited. His father in full dress uniform. 4 stars gleaming. The proof they refused to see. Brian's hands shook in his lap. He pressed them flat against his thighs to stop the trembling. Mrs. Newberry cleared her throat. "Now then, let's continue with our presentations." She consulted her clipboard. "Sophie Martinez, you're next." Sophie walked to the front, casting a nervous glance at Brian. The room settled back into its routine. Career day continued, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Brian stared at his desk. Someone had carved initials into the wood years ago. He traced them with his finger, over and over, not looking up, not meeting anyone's eyes. The classroom windows faced the parking lot. If Brian had looked, he might have seen the unmarked black sedan pulling into a visitor space. He might have noticed the 2 figures in dress uniforms stepping out. He might have seen them speaking with the security guard at the front entrance. But Brian wasn't looking at the windows. He was staring at his hands, still trembling, trying to remember what his father had said that morning. The truth doesn't need people to believe it for it to be real. Outside, footsteps approached down the hallway. Heavy, measured, military cadence. Brian didn't hear them yet, but he would. Sophie Martinez was halfway through explaining her mother's work as a civil rights attorney when the voices started in the hallway. At first, just a murmur, then louder, adult voices, clipped and professional, the kind of voices that expected immediate compliance. Mrs. Newberry frowned. "Sophie, please continue." But Sophie had stopped talking. She was looking toward the door, her presentation forgotten. Other students turned in their seats. The classroom faced the main hallway, and through the narrow window in the door, shadows moved. Multiple figures. The fluorescent lights outside gimmed as bodies blocked them. Mrs. Newberry moved toward the door, irritation creasing her features. "Excuse me one moment, class." She reached for the handle just as it opened from the outside. The first thing everyone saw was the uniform. Navy blue, nearly black. Gold buttons catching the light. White gloves. A peaked cap with an eagle insignia. The officer stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, his spine straight as a flagpole, his jaw set like granite. Behind him, a second officer. Same uniform, same rigid posture. Both men filled the doorframe completely, their presence transforming the casual atmosphere of career day into something else entirely. Something serious. The classroom went silent. Sophie's mouth hung open. Tyler Caldmo's smirk evaporated. Even Mrs. Newberry stopped mid-step, her hand still extended toward the door handle. "Ma'am." The first officer's voice was deep and formal. "We're looking for Brian Jordan." Mrs. Newberry blinked. What is this about?" The officer didn't repeat himself. He simply scanned the classroom, his eyes moving systematically from desk to desk, professional, efficient. The way someone searches when they've done it 1,000 times before. Brian sat frozen at his desk. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. The backpack beside his chair might as well have been screaming. The second officer stepped into the classroom. His shoes struck the linoleum with sharp precision. Click, click, click. Every student tracked his movement. Mrs. Newberry found her voice. "I'm going to need you to explain what's happening here. This is highly irregular. We have protocols." The first officer's gaze settled on Brian. He'd found him. "Brian Jordan?" Brian's voice came out as a whisper. "Yes, sir." "Come with us, please." Mrs. Newberry moved to block the aisle. "Now wait just a minute. This child is in my care. I can't let you remove him from a class without proper authorization from the principal's office." The officer's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, with respect, you'll want to step aside." "Not until someone tells me what's going on." Mrs. Newberry's face flushed red. "For all I know, you could be anyone in costume. This could be part of his elaborate fantasy." The officer reached into his breast pocket and produced an ID wallet. He flipped it open. The badge glinted. United States Army, Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Security Detail. Mrs. Newberry went pale. The second officer moved past her without another word. He approached Brian's desk and stood at attention. "Son, your father is here." Behind them, the doorway darkened further. A third figure appeared in the frame, and this one made the officers look small by comparison. Not in size, in presence. General Richard Jordan stood in the doorway, in full dress uniform. 4 silver stars on each shoulder caught the classroom lights like tiny suns. Ribbons formed perfect rows across his chest, a lifetime of service compressed into colored fabric. His cap sat precisely aligned on his head. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the room with the calm intensity of someone who'd commanded combat operations in 3 continents. He found his son immediately. Then he found Mrs. Newberry. The temperature in the classroom dropped 10 degrees. Outside in the hallway, Principal Kensington appeared, breathless and panicked. "General Jordan, I apologize, we had no idea." The general held up one gloved hand. The principal stopped talking mid-sentence. Mrs. Newberry stood, paralyzed. Her finger, which had pointed at Brian an hour ago in accusation, now trembled at her side. The classroom was so quiet that everyone heard her breath catch. General Jordan's voice filled the room. Deep, controlled, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Mrs. Newberry's lips moved, but no sound came out. The general waited. General Richard Jordan stepped fully into the classroom. The 2 officers moved aside with synchronized precision, flanking the doorway like sentries. Every eye in the room locked onto him. The uniform was immaculate, not a thread out of place, not a crease where there shouldn't be one. The blue fabric seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. His ribbons told stories. Bronze stars, Purple Hearts, Defense Superior Service Medals. Campaign ribbons from conflicts most of these children had only read about in history books. The 4 stars on each shoulder gleamed like they'd been polished that morning. They had been. Mrs. Newberry stood frozen 3 feet from Brian's desk. Her arm was still extended from her last gesture, her finger pointing vaguely in the direction of the door, as if she'd been caught mid-sentence when someone hit pause on her life. Her face had gone from red to white in the span of 10 seconds. The general's shoes struck the floor with measured steps. Click, click, click. He moved with the bearing of someone who'd spent 40 years having rooms full of people snap to attention when he entered. His eyes swept the classroom, taking in everything. The torn scraps of paper visible in the trash can beside Mrs. Newberry's desk. The wide-eyed students. Tyler Caldwell shrinking in his seat. Emma Chen with her hand over her mouth. And Brian, sitting at his desk in the back, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red. The general's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He stopped 6 feet from Mrs. Newberry. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. I received a call from my security detail 30 minutes ago. He paused. They informed me that Jefferson Elementary's principal had been trying to reach me regarding my son. Mrs. Newberry's mouth opened. Nothing came out. They also informed me that my son had been accused of lying about me. The general's eyes never left her face. Principal Kensington appeared in the doorway, his face glistening with sweat. General Jordan, sir, if I'd known, we had no records. The system didn't show. The general's hand rose slightly. Not a dramatic gesture, just a subtle movement. The principal stopped talking immediately. What's your name, ma'am? The general returned his attention to Mrs. Newberry. Shirley, she swallowed. Shirley Newberry. Mrs. Newberry, the general's voice remained perfectly even. Did you call my 10-year-old son a liar in front of his entire class? There was a misunderstanding. Did you tear up his assignment? The classroom was so silent that the heating system's distant hum sounded like thunder. Mrs. Newberry's eyes darted to the trash can. The evidence sat right there, crumpled and torn. General, I apologize. I had no way of knowing. You had no way of knowing if he was telling the truth. The general took one step closer. So, you assumed he was lying. Based on what, exactly? Mrs. Newberry's lips trembled. The circumstances he lives in. Choose your next words very carefully, ma'am. Mrs. Newberry closed her mouth. Her hand finally dropped to her side. The general turned away from her. He walked toward the back of the classroom, his steps measured and deliberate. Students leaned away from the aisle as he passed, giving him space the way civilians instinctively give space to authority. He stopped at Brian's desk. For the first time since entering, the general's expression softened. He looked down at his son, shoulders hunched, hands clenched in his lap, trying so hard not to cry. Stand up, soldier. Brian stood on shaking legs. His head barely reached his father's chest.
The general placed both hands on Brian's shoulders. You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Brian nodded, but tears spilled down his cheeks anyway. Nothing wrong. The general's voice was firm but gentle. You told the truth. That's what Jordans do. He pulled Brian into his arms. The embrace was brief but fierce. When he released him, the general straightened and turned back to face the classroom. Every student sat paralyzed. Tyler Caldwell stared at his desk. Marcus Williams looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Even Sophie Martinez, who'd been sympathetic, couldn't meet the general's eyes. Mrs. Newberry stood exactly where he'd left her, her face the color of chalk. General Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed 2 buttons and held it to his ear. Yes, this is General Richard Jordan. I need to speak with Superintendent Matthews immediately. His eyes locked onto Mrs. Newberry. It's regarding a teacher at Jefferson Elementary. Mrs. Newberry's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed her desk for support. The general waited for the call to connect, one hand resting protectively on Brian's shoulder. The classroom held its breath. A voice on the phone answered immediately. General Jordan spoke with the calm precision of someone dictating a military report. Yes, Superintendent Matthews. This is General Richard Jordan. My son Brian is a 4th grade student at Jefferson Elementary. I'm standing in his classroom right now after being informed that he was publicly humiliated, called a liar, and threatened with suspension. He paused. For telling the truth about my occupation. The general listened for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and extended the phone toward Mrs. Newberry. The superintendent would like to speak with you. Mrs. Newberry's hand shook as she took the phone. She pressed it to her ear. Yes? Her voice came out as a whisper. The color drained from her face as she listened. I understand. Yes. Yes, I understand completely. She handed the phone back with trembling fingers. The general ended the call and pocketed the device. Mrs. Newberry, you humiliated my son in front of his peers. You destroyed his assignment. You sent him to the principal's office and demanded he apologize for telling the truth. The general's voice remained steady, but each word landed like a hammer. You did all of this because you looked at a 10-year-old black child from a modest neighborhood and decided he must be lying. Tears streamed down Mrs. Newberry's face now.
General Jordan, I am so deeply sorry. I made a terrible mistake. You should have believed him. The general cut her off. You should have treated him with the respect every child deserves. You should have done your job. He turned back to Brian. Come on, son, get your things. Brian grabbed his backpack with shaking hands. As he stood, the bag's weight shifted. The photograph, his father in dress uniform, 4 stars gleaming, slipped out from between the textbook pages and fell to the floor.
Tyler Caldwell, sitting in the nearest desk, stared at it. His eyes went wide. The general bent down and picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a moment, then at Brian. You were going to show them? Brian nodded. But you said security protocol. The general's expression softened. I said we keep a low profile, soldier. He handed the photo to Brian. I never said you had to hide who you are. He turned to address the entire classroom. His voice carried to every corner. My son told you the truth today. He placed his hand on Brian's shoulder. And because he looks a certain way, because his family doesn't live in a mansion, because he rides a public school bus, you decided his truth must be a lie. The students sat in absolute silence. Several looked ashamed. Emma Chen was crying. Marcus Williams stared at his hands. Let me be very clear. The general's eyes swept across every face. Character has nothing to do with the size of someone's house or the cost of their clothes. Integrity isn't measured by zip codes. And the next time someone tells you their truth, maybe you should listen before you laugh. He looked at Mrs. Newberry one final time. The school board will be in touch. Then he placed his hand on Brian's back and guided him toward the door. The 2 officers fell into step behind them, forming an escort. They moved through the classroom, past the frozen students, past the crumpled assignment pieces in the trash, past Principal Kensington still stammering apologies in the hallway. Brian walked beside his father, his head no longer bowed, the photograph clutched in his hand, his backpack on his shoulder. As they stepped into the main corridor, other classroom doors opened. Teachers and students emerged, drawn by the commotion. They lined the hallway, watching in silence as the general and his son walked past. At the main entrance, sunlight streamed through the glass doors. The black sedan waited in the circle drive, its engine running. The general opened the door for Brian. Before his son climbed in, he crouched down one more time. I'm proud of you, Brian. You stood up there and told the truth, even when it was hard. That takes courage. I'm sorry I didn't show them the picture earlier, Dad. Maybe if I had... The general shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. He stood and opened the car door wider. Now let's go home. Your mother's going to want to hear about this. Brian climbed into the back seat. The general closed the door, then walked around to the other side. As he slid in beside his son, he looked back at the school one final time. Through the glass entrance, Mrs. Newberry stood in the hallway, watching them leave. Her face was streaked with tears. Principal Kensington stood beside her, already on his phone. The general turned away. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot, carrying father and son home. Inside the school, the whispers have already begun. By tomorrow, everyone would know the truth about Brian Jordan. But Brian already knew something more important. The truth didn't need their belief to be real. It just needed someone brave enough to tell it. If you believe that every child deserves to be believed when they tell the truth, regardless of how they look or where they come from, then hit that like button right now. If you think teachers like Mrs. Newberry need to learn that a child's worth isn't determined by their zip code or the brand on their shoes, then subscribe to this channel. And if you know someone, anyone, who's ever been judged, dismissed, or called a liar just because they didn't look the part, then share this story. Because somewhere right now, there's another Brian sitting in a classroom, afraid to speak his truth. Your like costs you nothing. Your subscription takes 1 second. Your share could change someone's perspective forever. Don't scroll past this.
Brian's story ended with vindication, but thousands of kids are still waiting for theirs. Like, subscribe, share. Be the person who stands up for the Brians of the world. And comment below, have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Throw up a heart emoji if you stand with Brian.